But about 20 years ago, we still used to have quite heavy winters with a lot of snow. So they used to cover the monument for the winter time with the wooden box, so it wouldn't be harmed by snow. And one time this box fell, it decapitated the king. So it survived all the wars, but the thing that was supposed to protect it harmed it, right? Then as we found the head, we put it back on its place, and 2 years ago it was renovated. Downstairs, those buildings, they belong to one of the most popular high schools in Warsaw. The boys of that school, this yellow one on the right, were fighting during the war. Most of them was killed. The one that survived wrote a book about them, which is right now compulsory in our school, so that's why everybody knows it. And a few years ago, when they were changing a floor in a gym of that school, they found another German bomb from the wartime underneath the floor. It's still a big problem here in Warsaw, and they're still finding a lot of bombs, bullets and bodies from the wartime. So then on the left you can see basically again that Ujazdowski castle that was built for the queens. Then one of the Saxon kings wanted to transform it in his residence, so that's why he ordered to build that canal in front of it that we saw before. And the king wanted to be navigated, but when the first ship entered the canal, it got stuck. So basically the king got mad and created for himself a different palace in a different part of the city. And the last king gave it to the hospital. The hospital was here up to the Warsaw Uprising, completely destroyed, rebuilt from the ground in the 70s. Today we have there the center of modern art. The royal park with the royal castle. So normally it's like 4.5 kilometers. So if you walk fast, you can walk it in 1 hour. It would usually take the king 4 days to go one way or the other, because he had so many friends he had to visit on the way. So that's why you're gonna see that it's street full with palaces, because all the nobles wanted to have their palaces on that street, so the king would visit them basically on the way. But the locals call it a Ministry of Injustice, because this is where the communists were torturing people during the communist times. So in the basement we also have a museum that shows the ways of tortures. Behind it, several palaces that I told you belong to many noble families. They survived the war because they were used by the Nazi generals. Right now most of them is used or by embassies or by governmental buildings. While on the right side, the monument of Ignacy, but he was also our prime minister between the two world wars, the minister of foreign affairs, and then the Polish ambassador in US. He actually died in US. His body was moved here to the Warsaw's cathedral. To prostu tylko tam powolutku, że mogła pokazać i ambasadę, i Reagana, i in original palace. Behind that modern building, that's American embassy. Actually, the Americans also received the palace to make their embassy, but they said afraid of the listening devices, so they demolished the entire palace and they built that embassy in the 70s. So the palace survived the war, but it didn't survive the Americans. Right, well, on the right side, just in front of the American embassy, the monument of Ronald Reagan. And since he's standing just in front of the American embassy, the locals are joking that he's watching them if they work okay. Behind it, at the end of that street that turns you to the right, you can see that round building with the green roof. That's our Parliament House. So that's actually the Congress. The Senate is behind it. It was built in the 20s, destroyed and reconstructed after the war. But since it has that round form, and the locals here have a very sarcastic sense of humor, we usually call it the biggest circus of Poland with 460 clowns. And although that joke was created in the 20s when the building was constructed, but it's valid all the time, unfortunately. The bullet holes from the Warsaw Uprising. Yeah, here, if you look closely to the columns, you can see the bullet holes on the right. Then also on the right side, the monument of Incentivitos, who was a very famous politician between the two world wars. He created a peasant movement here in Poland. On the left, the Ministry of Economy. On the right, that's that building with the clock. That's a special school for deafs and mutes, opened in 1817 and still working. In the middle, the Church of Saint Alexander. That church was built in the 19th century as a gift to the Russian Tsar, Alexander, who was also a king of Poland, so that's why it has a name of Saint Alexander. And although the architect was Polish, he was very fascinated with the Italian architecture, so that's why the church has a form of the Pantheon of Rome. Right, was also destroyed and reconstructed after the war, and it's extremely important because I got married here, so you're basically in my neighborhood. party. After the fall of the communists, they were thinking about transforming it into a Warsaw University Library, but it turned out the construction of the building was too fragile to support the weight of the books, so they rented for the first stock market and financial center, and from the money from rent the Bill of Avenue. That's his name. The Gaull also visited Warsaw in the 60s, and he caused some problems because they located him in that original palace of the King Sobieski, so palace from the 17th century with the original furniture. Well, the Gaull was very tall, and it turned out he didn't fit in the bed, so it was. And then that huge building on the right side, that's a National Museum that was built in the 30s, miraculously survived the war. And the last annex to National Museum is used as the Army Museum. So here in a second you'll be able to see the planes and tanks from the Second World War. Yeah, so here on the right side. Hasn't been regulated, so it's a completely wild river, which is why we don't have any transport on the river nor the cruises. What we do have are floods, especially in the springtime when the snow is dissolving in the mountains and the water level gets really high. And then you asked me probably about that stallion, right? The one on the left, the National Stallion, and that was built for the Euro Cup in 2012. National colors, white and red. It has a form of a Easter basket. It's for 55,000 people. It has a roof that can be opened or closed. And it's also very nicely illuminated at night. We are joking that from the distance it looks like a spaceship with all the lights that it has. Yeah. Basically, right now it's used for special events. Of course, there are some sports events over there, but there are, for example, concerts, right? Madonna, Beyonce, AC/DC, Bon Jovi, Rolling Stones, Rihanna performed here, right? So basically it's used for concerts. Book fairs are held over here. In December there was a World Championships in chess. And right now we have a temporary COVID hospital over here, right? So, as I said, it's used for different purposes. Normally in the winter time they would put there the ice skating beach, but right now due to the COVID hospital. But that district, it's called Praga, but it has nothing to do with the capital of the Czech Republic. It's just we have here a verb wyprażać, and that means to burn. At the beginning, there are just forests here, so to be able to cultivate anything here, they would first had to burn the forest. So Praga from burning. In the 17th century, Praga was a separate city. In the 18th century, our last king, Poniatowski, introduced Praga into and crossed the river until January of 45, which is why there are much more original buildings here in Praga than on the other side. Most of the movies about the war, like The Pianist of Polanski, they were basically held here in Praga. Nightclub, which is called La Playa, so it's in Spanish. It's a very popular place. While on this side we have boulevards. On the boulevards in the summertime, there's also a lot of coffee houses, bars, and so on. So river is very popular in the summertime. Tourist attraction in the winter time when it's covered with snow. Right, it's that street, it's called the Jerusalem Avenue, right? So this palm is called the Greetings from Jerusalem Avenue. They wanted to take the palm down a few years ago, but people started to protest, so they kept it. Basically, we got used to the palm, so we use that orientative spot, right? Always you go to the palm and you turn right to left. Okay, so we are back on the rail route, and that part of the rail route between these lights and the next light was completely destroyed. So all the buildings here are reconstructed, and they just reconstructed the facades. Before the war, some of the buildings had 7 floors, some of them only 1 floor, but after the war they decided to rebuild them in the same level. On the left, Café Blikle opened in 1869. Basically, that was the only family-owned company that survived the nationalization during the communist times. right? So it was very close to the Communist Party quarter. They used to come here for a coffee and donut, and they were afraid that if they're going to take them away, the flavor of the donuts wouldn't be the same. So they kept it, and that's why it survived. Right, so basically that's a pink building on the left. This is where Joseph Conrad grew up. Right now he's famous as a British writer, but to be honest, he was Polish, and he basically grew up on that street. Conrad was his middle name, not his last name. And then if you look, that palace is used as a museum of Frederick Chopin. Very nice, multimedial. If you like the music, this is the place to go. So the street is called Things. On the right side there is my high school. So you saw my church, there is my high school, and in a second you're gonna see my university. So as I said, you're in my neighborhood. The original, although the Nazis took the monument with them when they were leaving the city, but it was heavy, so they left it on the way, and we brought the monument back to Warsaw. On the left, the Holy Cross Church. So basically in a pillar of that church, Chopin's heart is buried. Also, that church received the title of a minor basilica from our Pope, John Paul II. And every Sunday at 9 a.m. there is a mass transmitted by the public radio from that church to the whole country. It was actually one of the postulates of Lech Wałęsa during his strikes in the 80s. At the time, not everyone had a TV, so radio was the most popular media, and he requested that, and the communists agreed. So despite of the fact that consists of the royal palace of the Swedish kings and few other noble palaces as well. It's just a historical campus because the Warsaw University is the biggest one in the country. They have a lot of buildings all around the city. It's public, it's free of charge, and it's also always competing with the one from Krakow, which one is the first or which one is the second. This palace on the right is a university museum, and here we also give classes of Polish to those poor foreigners that are trying to learn an impossible language. Then also on the right side, the most beautiful Rococo church of Warsaw, and this one is original. Inside it has original organ from Chopin's time. Chopin was playing on that organ during the special masses for students. Here when you can see those trees on the right side, before the war used to be high school for girls in which Madame Curie used to study when she was still just Maria Skłodowska. Right, at the time there was no university that would accept women, so that's why she had to go to Paris to study. She got married and she stayed in France. On the left, the Raffles Europejski Hotel, which was built in the 19th century. It's original, although when it was taken by the Raffles, they just left the original facade, and inside they built a modern hotel. So right now it's the most fancy hotel of Warsaw. Well, on the right side, the Bristol Hotel, original also inside, opened in 1901. Here used to stay JFK, Jackie Onassis, Pablo Picasso, Margaret Thatcher, the Queen of England, Paul McCartney, Rolling Stones. Roman Polanski and Andrew Brody when they were making The Pianist, right? So basically all the famous guests usually stayed here at the Bristol. And next to Bristol, on the right side, the Presidential Palace with the monument of Duke Joseph Poniatowski, so that nephew of the last king I told you about on the bridge. The palace is original because it was used as a Deutsche House. They had here a hotel and a casino. And then during the communist times, it was the quarter of the communist government. So this is where the Warsaw Treaty was signed in 1955. Then the fall of the communism in 89, the famous conversations of the Round Table between Lech Wałęsa, Solidarity, and General Jaruzelski and the communists, right? The fall of the communists here in 89 in the palace. So right now it's a presidential palace, so this is where the president lives and works. And next to it, the Carmelite Church, which is right now used as a oldest seminary in Warsaw. And then the monument of Adam Mickiewicz, who is considered the national poet for Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus. Well, he was born in today's Belarus, then he went to Vilnius and he wrote a book that starts Lithuania, my homeland, but he wrote it in Polish. Well, Lithuanian is a completely different language, not even from the same family. So right now all three countries claim he was theirs. He also had to escape from the country during the Russian occupation period. He was a great friend of Chopin in Paris. So here, when you can see that brown sign on the left, that's basically the chocolates of Emil Wedel. If you want to try those drinking chocolates, you have to go to one of those Wedel chocolate stores. In the Intercontinental, I think you have them in the lobby, in the Oriental, yeah? Yeah. On the right side, the Christian charity foundation called Caritas, right? Then that white palace on the right, that was built by the Commerce Association to organize balls and parties. And next to it, that building of arcade, that used to be the Bernardinian monastery, but the monks were thrown out from the country during the 19th century Russian occupation, and the building was transformed into the agricultural museum and library. And over here, Madame Curie, when she was still just Maria Skłodowska, she had her first laboratory inside that building. Next to it, the Saint Anna Church, which is also having the most beautiful organ in the city, and the castle square. But we're gonna come back here at the end, because first we're gonna go to the Jewish ghetto to see the monuments of the ghetto, and then we're gonna come back here to have a walk through the old town. So the leader of the Catholic Church in the country, but the last primate actually lived. He was the brother of our last king, so Michał Poniatowski, at the end of the 18th century. Right now it's a hotel and a conference center. It's a boutique hotel because they only have 20 rooms. The rest are just conference rooms, and it's called Bellotto. Bernardo Bellotto was an Italian painter that was called Warsaw, built in 1833 by Italian architect Antonio Corazzi. Destroyed and reconstructed after the war. So basically it hosts the Opera House and the National Theatre. It's actually the biggest opera house in Europe when it comes to the size of the building. Well, to be honest, during our entire Warsaw history, we would have here a system that consisted of inviting Italian architects that were single to present them here to some beautiful Polish ladies, so they will get married here and stay. And that basically worked. Antonio Corazzi is the only one that we know of that escaped and went back to Italy, but as I checked, he never got married, so we're not entirely sure if he was straight. And right now we just entered that biggest square of Warsaw, so that Piłsudski Square. And here on the right side you're gonna see that white arcade, which is a tomb of an unknown soldier. So over there we have a real tomb of a soldier who was killed during the First World War, an eternal flame, and a change of guards every full hour. But that arcade is also the last part of the royal palace of the Saxon kings. The palace was blown up by the Nazis, and it's haven't been reconstructed. Although right now the government announced that they're going to reconstruct the palace. It's a huge museum, and it's very popular. It's actually got a